Welcome back to The Invisible Ingredient, a place where we explore the simple yet sobering truth: glyphosate is everywhere. So let's talk about it. In episode 1, we mapped how glyphosate intersects with human and planetary life. And today, we widen the lens to ask a question: how did this chemical become so embedded in our food system in the first place? To guide us, Jeffrey Smith joins us. Jeffrey has been a global thought leader on the health dangers of genetically modified organisms. You may have heard them referred to as GMOs for something like 27 years. He's authored books, directed documentaries, presentations in over 45 countries, trained speakers, and organised over 10,000 advocates around this space. He counsels world leaders on 6 continents, and his research has inspired tens of thousands of healthcare professionals to prescribe non-GMO and organic diets. Jeffrey and his Institute for Responsible Technology are now sounding the alarm about GMO 2.0, new technologies that can cause health and environmental disasters. Today, we trace the origin story of herbicide-tolerant crops, the regulatory and marketing choices that sped this adoption, and the feedback loops that followed. From weed resistance to rising applications and residues, we weigh claims on all sides and ask, what would it take to unwind this dependence and move forward with a food system that truly nourishes life? To start with, thank you for finding time in your busy schedule to sit down with us and have a yarn. And I think as a starting point, Jeffrey, it might be apt to for some of the listeners who may have heard of GMOs and might have heard of glyphosate, but they certainly might want a little bit of a reminder of what we're talking about, but also the interconnectedness of both of those is something that a lot of people aren't aware of.
GMO means genetically modified organism. There's ways to modify DNA naturally through sex, sexual reproduction, crossbreeding, things like that. But in the case of genetic engineering or genetic modification, you do it in an unnatural way. And the primary goal would be in the past to introduce a trait or a number of traits to a plant or animal. It's also used in humans to heal or to fix things. And there's now talking about customized babies, but it's all basically looking at genes and gene expression and either introducing a foreign gene that carries a trait or editing and changing existing genes or knocking out a gene. Now, we know very little. I mean, if you go to a geneticist, they may say, we know a great deal about genes and DNA. And then the next year, well, we know even more, and we didn't even know this. One professor told me it used to take 1 day in a semester to explain what a gene is, and now it takes an entire semester. So the level of complexity of what's going on in the DNA is not yet fully understood, and yet the result of genetic engineering, in addition to the possibility of creating an edited trait, is massive collateral damage in the DNA. There's deletions, additions, mutations, rearrangements, doubling or tripling of what you're trying to put in. Now, there were geneticists and molecular biologists doing work on genetic engineering in the 90s. And I went to a lecture by one of them who was award-winning, National Institutes of Health, Cancer Research. And he said, I am a genetic engineer. And yet, as a genetic engineer, I know for sure that the tools are blunt. They're not precise. They create damage. And what's happening this year, this was in 1996, is that Monsanto was going to be introducing genetically engineered Roundup-ready crops and planting them in millions of acres and feeding the products to humans. And the scientists said, there is no way that Monsanto or anyone at this early stage of genetic engineering can guarantee safety. And once you release these into the environment, they self-replicate. So the contamination of the gene pool is permanent for as long as soy exists, for as long as corn exists. Once you've introduced it, it's part of that food chain. That's what got me interested in GMOs. And I learned that Monsanto had sold a great deal of glyphosate in the form of Roundup. Originally, glyphosate was sold as a descaler to clean the insides of industrial boilers and pipes. It's a chelator. It grabs onto minerals, so it causes a stripping of the minerals. And when they let the glyphosate along with the minerals out into the ground, it killed all the plants. And so Monsanto bought the patent of the molecule and then patented it as an herbicide. They also patented it as an antibiotic or a biocide. Now, they were selling a lot of Roundup, but the glyphosate was going off patent in 2000. So they needed a way to maintain dominance. And so even before the technology was safe and ready, they pretended it was, and they took genes and put it into soybeans, etc. Now, where did they get those genes? I mentioned that glyphosate is an antibiotic, a biocide. It kills bacteria. But there was bacteria surviving in a chemical waste dump near a factory with glyphosate in it. So somehow the bacteria survived. And Monsanto said, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene out of the surviving bacteria that allowed it to survive and put it into soybeans and canola and corn. And now you can spray glyphosate, which normally kills soybeans, canola, and corn, and it doesn't kill it. So the advantage to a farmer is tremendous in terms of labor saving, because instead of having to just spot shoot a weed or just treat the weeds before growing season and then have to deal with them afterwards with hose or whatever, you can just spray right over the top of the field of the soybeans, the Roundup Ready soybeans, the Roundup Ready corn, canola, cotton, sugar beets, and alfalfa now as well. Now, glyphosate is just one of the poisons in Roundup. There's also a poison that drives it in, a surfactant that drives it into the tissues of the plants. It also drives it into skin. In fact, Monsanto had to test to see how much Roundup got into human skin. So they took cadaver skin, exposed it to Roundup, and 10% went in, which was way beyond the allowable level. So they did Monsanto science, which I have been studying and exposing for years. They took new human skin, cadaver skin, and they cooked it. You know, when you cook meat, it gets really tough. But that wasn't tough enough. They then took the cooked human skin and then froze it. And they had this leather-like human skin, and then they applied the Roundup. And it only absorbed a little bit. And that's what they told the Environmental Protection Agency, lying to them, never telling them that they had cooked and frozen the human skin. So what happens is it drives the glyphosate into the plant, and then it gets deposited. Some go into the soil, 15% or so, in through the roots in the soil. 85% go into the plant, and particularly the fast growing part, which is the part that we eat. So now you can't wash it off. It's inside the soy, corn, etc. And we're exposed to it. And Monsanto lied about how safe it was. And we now know from documents they were forced to turn over. They knew it could create cancer. They knew it was linked to tumors and other things. They had all sorts of evidence. And it was just on glyphosate alone. They didn't want to test the whole formulation on health of rats because it was so much more dangerous. And they didn't want to have that knowledge because they'd rather just not know. So they spent years covering up, lying about, and rigging their research to pretend that glyphosate was safe. They ended up hiring experts who would say what they wanted to say, ghost wrote articles and paid scientists to sign their name. And we have now all that evidence. So glyphosate turns out to be one of the most dangerous chemicals on the planet. GMOs turn out to be a reservoir of them. GMOs are dangerous on their own. So Dr. Seralini tested rats with Roundup Ready corn that had been sprayed with Roundup, and they had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. And then he had rats that were fed Roundup in the drinking water that didn't have the Roundup Ready corn, and they had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. Aha, it's the glyphosate. But no, because the rats that ate the Roundup Ready corn that hadn't been sprayed also had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. So GMOs alone, glyphosate alone, and together cause these problems. And I'm happy to talk. I know you have Stephanie Xenophon talking about the health dangers, and I'm happy to jump in there as well and prepare people with really scary correlations and charts. But carry on with your questions.
Yeah, that they do get rather scary and can be sometimes a little bit overwhelming. Let's say. So we've gone from being a weed killer, well, used for cleaning pipes, to a weed killer, to now across all of our crops.
Yes, you see, it's not just sprayed on genetically engineered crops. As you know, I remember in 2006, Monsanto started putting it out, I think that was the year, to wheat farmers, saying spray it 3 days, 3 to 5 days before harvest. And what it'll do is it starts to kill the plant. So the plant will ripen. It's like save the children. It'll ripen the seeds quickly. So it'll fast ripen it. It will dry down the crop so that there's less potential for mold. And it will kill the weeds for next year. Again, really easy for farmers to do. But now wheat and oats and mung beans and chickpeas and lentils, they all have high levels of glyphosate in them, even though it ultimately killed the plant because it's not Roundup Ready, it's nonetheless sprayed with Roundup.
What have we done? It seems as if there was a promise at the time for farmers, right? Like from these large corporations, call it big ag, if you will, how GMOs and glyphosate were marketed to farmers and the public is due for some speculation. Can you speak a little bit from what you know about what that promise was? At that time it was, go big, go home, productivity, profitability. We need to feed the world. All these stories that we were told. It's safe enough for us to drink. Like,
Yeah.
I'm really interested in your perspective in this big marketing campaign and this promise made to humanity and farmers.
It depended on who the audience was. They created a line or a story for each. For the US government, we were experiencing trade deficits. So there was a Council of Competitiveness headed by Vice President Dan Quayle under first George Bush. And they were trying to increase US exports. And they were convinced by Monsanto that genetically engineered foods would increase US exports and reduce the deficit. The opposite happened. No one wanted to buy the poisonous stuff. We closed markets by introducing it, but that was one of the lies. They also had the ear of the White House and said we need to get it on the market quickly for this competitive advantage. And so the White House told the FDA, EPA, and USDA to get GMOs out there quickly, but they didn't want Congress to create new laws because they would have lost control. They wanted these regulatory agencies to use the same laws that had been created before GMOs were introduced. So they regulate them with laws that were never designed for GMOs. And they just, and they put some in EPA, some in USDA, some in FDA. And to give you an example of how the storyline went in the Food and Drug Administration, they basically instructed the FDA to hire Monsanto's former attorney and create a new position for him, the Deputy Secretary of Policy. Now, he had worked with Monsanto and a group of biotech companies earlier to create what would be the dream wish of regulation, which was like self-regulate. No one tells us what to do, no one labels it, no testing required. Then he was put in a position to implement that dreamscape into reality. While the FDA created a 17-person committee to evaluate GMOs and make recommendations. They made their recommendations, sent up to Michael Taylor. He would write a report that ignored his recommendations. In fact, one scientist, Louis Pribble, said, "What's become of this document? It's basically driven by corporate interests. It has nothing to do with the side effects." And the final policy written by Michael Taylor was no testing, no labeling. Companies like Monsanto can determine if their foods are safe. And then he became Monsanto's vice president. Now, the justification for that hands-off position was a sentence in the policy which said the agency is not aware of any information showing that foods created by these new methods differ from other foods in any uniform and meaningful way. That was a lie. Documents made public from a lawsuit pioneered by Stephen Drucker in 1998 showed that the overwhelming consensus among the scientists working at the FDA was exactly the opposite, that GMOs were different and dangerous and needed to be studied and needed human toxicological studies, etc. And they said GMOs could create allergens, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems. We also found out that when the whitewashed report was sent to the White House, it came back, no, there's too many pages on the potential environmental problems. Reduce them. Someone also came back and said, and these are like offices of management and budget, White House attorney, people who had no scientific background. And they said, you should indicate that it's more precise and safer than regular foods. So as it went up the political chain, GMOs got safer and safer. And then the official position was there's no difference. And on that basis, they didn't need any testing or labeling. Now, to farmers, it was this is new, this is the way it's going to be. And when you buy our seeds, you sign a contract that you will not save the seeds for next year, soybeans, for example, but buy it year after year, and you'll only use our version of glyphosate herbicides, not the Chinese imports or whatever. So they also set out to investigate and to sue all these farmers that they believed were saving seeds. Sometimes they tested the wrong field. They would send threatening letters. It was really draconian tactics that were horrible. And that's a whole nother story that we can go into in terms of how they treated farmers and got farmers to rat or to snitch on other farmers, and then they get a free leather jacket, and how they tried to get farmers to tell stories that weren't true by bribing them in free chemicals and things like that, which we've documented. Now, to the world, when there was resistance to GMOs, then they came out with a full-page ad in Europe saying, this is going to feed the world. So they made that up. It was never designed to feed the world. If your goal was to feed the world, you wouldn't create genetically engineered soy and corn. You wouldn't create Roundup ready versions of these. There's all sorts of reasons why you wouldn't. There's the diversity on the field. Anyway, it goes on. But they were just lying and making it up because a public relations firm created that argument. Now, there was a meeting at the time of African leaders, and 27 of the 28 countries represented, they signed a counter response saying, don't use us as an excuse to market your dangerous goods. Came into the European press right after. Experts in feeding the world, I've interviewed many, There was a top report with 2,500 pages, over 400 scientists signed on by 58 countries, declared that they're trying to figure out how to feed the world. GMOs had nothing to offer to feed the world, eradicate poverty, or create sustainable agriculture. Zero. But that was another one of their examples, or one of their storylines. To countries, they would say, the U.S. has approved it. The FDA has looked at it carefully and said it was safe. And if you don't adopt it, you'll fall behind. So they said that to Australia. I remember I put out a book, Genetic Roulette, which is right over my shoulder. And the activists in the country bought the rights for Australia, made 5,000 copies, sent one to every elected official in the country, and then brought me there. And they were trying to stop states from allowing the planting of GM canola. And when I met with the ministers of agriculture in Adelaide and Perth and different places, I would explain this is going to be negative for agriculture. You're going to lose your special premium that you now have over Canada because people don't want their GMOs. You're going to lose select markets in Japan. There's going to be contamination, difficulty selling. And the states that allowed me to speak to their ministers did not approve it. And then the one in Melbourne and Sydney refused to meet with me because they had already decided to approve it. And it turns out they had given the farm unions and organizations a percentage. So there was a financial benefit, and everything we said was going to happen happened. They lost the premium. There was contamination. Farmers were having difficulty selling. It was a disaster. We knew it. We'd seen it happen all over the place. But for the government, it's like you're going to fall behind. But there was also individual bribery going on that we know. There was 140 illegal or questionable payments in Indonesia. I talked to someone from a country I can't name. He was in charge of deciding whether Monsanto was going to come in. And he said, in the first meeting, they said, when you approve GMOs, we're going to give you a very well-paying job with Monsanto. First thing they said. And he didn't approve it, but eventually it was approved in his country. And then to the press, it all depends on what they want to play. This is the future. It'll feed the world. Everyone against us is Luddites and crazy, etc. So they focused on academia, government, farmers, and media. They had a different message for each of these, and these are the four major targets of their disinformation campaign. And the thing is, they didn't have much for consumers because it was basically traits for farmers. So that's where I came in. All these other NGOs were just focusing on environment and farmers' rights to save seed, and it should be illegal to patent organisms. And I'm saying, guys, hello, there's health problems. And so I wrote a book, Seeds of Deception, on the health problems, and then it became the world's best-selling book on the subject. And I spent 13 years traveling 6 to 9 months building a movement around the health dangers. And so now 51% of Americans, 48% of worldwide consumers, it's probably more by now, understand that GMOs are dangerous for health. And that has slowed Monsanto's plans, which were to genetically engineer and patent virtually all commercial seeds in the world long ago.
It's quite the playbook that was written, huh? They covered all sectors, all territories, were able to sway opinions in all the right places and use dubious science to support a lot of it.
Let's call it fraudulent science, just to be clear.
Okay, sure.
It's not, we talked about, cooking and freezing human cadaver skin and then not telling. We talked about Dr. Parry was hired as the leading expert in genotoxicity, which causes cancer. And by Monsanto, can you look at these studies to show that there's no genotoxicity? He goes, actually, there is. Show me more. And they sent him more studies. He says, oh, yeah, it's clear, and it's probably worse than the full formulation. They got rid of Dr. Parry. They wrote a review article with exactly the opposite conclusions, paid people to sign it, and that helped get glyphosate approved. This is, one of Monsanto's executives went to jail because he went to a company to help conduct certain studies, and 3 executives from that company went to jail because they were lying about their safety studies. Complete fraud. So it was considered one of the biggest frauds in history because they were doing most of the safety studies in the United States for big companies, and it was fraudulent. So it's not dubious. It's really lying. It's really covering it up. It's getting scientists fired who find problems. I mean, I opened my book, Seeds of Deception, with the story of Arpad Pustai, who was paid with a government grant to find out how to test for GMO food safety. He discovered it was dangerous, was fired from his job after 35 years, silenced with threats of a lawsuit.
Wow. Incredible, huh? We've actually got Brent Wisner on a bit later in one of the podcasts to unpack that.
I love Brent. Brent is, for those people listening to me, you don't want to miss Brent. He's like this attack dog. He's so good. So Monsanto wouldn't let any of their people get on stage with me, right? It was like, and even the United States Department of Agriculture wouldn't speak at a conference the same day where I was speaking. But Monsanto's scientists got invited to speak on the Doctor's TV show, mainstream daytime TV. And I got called like 2 days before, and they said, "Can you tune in by Skype?" So we caught Monsanto by surprise. And so I gave them the truth about Michael Taylor and GMOs and glyphosate and whatnot. And Donna Farmer, who was their toxicologist, said, "As a mother and as a scientist, I have complete confidence in this molecule as safe." Then the Monsanto papers came out because of Brent Wisner, and I was reading quotes from Donna Farmer telling other people in Monsanto, "We can't say that it doesn't cause cancer. It might have been the Roundup that caused these tumors." She was on the private side explaining that she wasn't 100% convinced. So I contacted the Doctor's TV show producer and I said, "I have some evidence that what she said wasn't true, or what she was saying in private was different than what she was saying in public." So I sent them the documents that Brent Wisner made it public, and it had Donna Farmer's name in it. And so they said, "Okay, looks like you have something here. I think we're going to do something." I said, "How long is it going to be?" 3 to 4 minutes. They did an entire episode. Brent and I met in the green room. We took positions next to each other. They did a whole, it was a fantastic thing, and he would like attack this epidemiologist that was brought in by Skype. And I'm like, "Who is this guy? He's amazing." He's outstanding. I was honored to be working with him a bit, and I'm glad you got him.
Yeah, he's a force of nature. I look forward to unpacking and having a dialogue with him soon. I want to. What came up before was looking at, like, we've changed our farming practices by introducing glyphosate, the GMO integration. What have you seen and researched that's meant for our soils, our farmers, and our food supply, and in particular talking about the health of the above? I'd love to dive a little deeper into that story, because that's what so many people do not understand. What's happening on the ground in our bodies and within our bigger food supply chain. It seems like this corporate capture is doing harm rather than what we should be doing by growing food, is giving people nutrient-dense food and health.
So I remember visiting my friend Vandana Shiva in her farm in Navdanya in India. And she had 187, I'm guessing the number, possibly it's true, I don't know, different types of plants growing. And she didn't need to use pesticides or herbicides. The diversity handled that. The soil was rich. And I learned from some people who are experts at agriculture that pests don't attack really healthy plants. It's like, lions attack the weak ones. Pests don't attack healthy plants because they can't break down the proteins. They're looking for things with, amino acid structures that are weak. Then you need pesticides. So if you're able to create strong soil, microbiomes, diversity, etc., you don't need the chemicals. But all of industrial ag survives on sales of chemicals. So at the end of World War II, they had excess phosphorus, which they used for fertilizer. They had excess, the nerve gases that they used as insecticides and probably herbicides. And so, because of the industry that had turned to a war economy, they had the ability to produce these chemicals, and they convinced farmers and the government to support that. But the chemical sales are based on weak plants, weak soil systems. If you're using proper soil, then you have nitrogen that's produced there. You have all these different organisms that create an absorption of the water so that there can be proper um, uh, uh, resilience against drought. You have plants that are producing phytochemicals to ward off plants, and those are also medicines for humans and give more taste. So if you turn your farm into a monoculture and you start spraying with that, you have created weaker systems, weaker plants, less healthy, not nutrient dense, and you're spraying things that are killing the microbiome of the soil. One of the things I mentioned was that glyphosate was patented as an antibiotic. It kills the beneficial bacteria in our gut. It kills the beneficial bacteria in the soil. It feeds the fungus and plant disease in the soil. Don Huber said there's over 60 types of fungal diseases in the soil that have been promoted because of the use of glyphosate, causing billions of dollars, and very few people have put it together. So you end up killing some of the biology that creates that structure in the soil that allows absorption of water. So if you look after a rain at a regular cornfield and a Roundup Ready cornfield, the Roundup Ready cornfield has puddles because it can't absorb the water. The other one has absorbed the water. So spraying an entire center of America with this means that you're going to cause runoff and flooding and less resilience during drought. Rodale Institute grew side by side, GMO and non-GMO, organic. The organic had the same yield except in times of drought, and it outproduced it dramatically and needed less inputs. So they have displaced natural biology with chemicals that themselves create a weak ecosystem and inferior food. And then you take glyphosate, which chelates the minerals. Remember, it pulls off the minerals from inside the boilers and pipes. It attaches itself to minerals and doesn't let go. So the transport of minerals in the plant is dropped dramatically. The amount of minerals in the plant is dropped dramatically. So you have mineral deficient plants. Then you have animals, livestock in the United States and elsewhere. The number one product that they consume is Roundup Ready crops: soy, corn, cottonseed, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa. They're mineral deficient. They also have glyphosate residues. They eat the glyphosate residues, it grabs onto the remaining, not all of them, but some of the minerals in their system, making them unavailable. And so you have these chronic or epidemic levels of disease and infertility among livestock. And then humans eat the mineral deficient plants, the mineral deficient animals, and have glyphosate residues, which not only block mineral use, which is like the ignition that starts the engine. You need certain minerals for certain biochemical pathways to take place. It's like you have all these workers, you hire them, and you don't bring the foreman in, they just sit around. Without the foreman, it's like without that manganese or selenium or whatever, nothing's going to happen. And these are being blocked. Then it also damages the mitochondria, creates leaky gut, creates lack of communication between cells, suppresses digestive enzymes, damages the beneficial gut bacteria. These are foundational pieces of health, which is why it's related to so many different diseases, and you'll hear that from others as well. So we have a agricultural system based on sickness, based on not using natural systems in order to enrich the coffers of the agriculture, the big ag, and you have a corporate capture of the regulatory agencies who essentially work on behalf of big ag and not on behalf of regenerative and organic.
That's certainly the case that we've experienced here in Australia, and I know it's the same in the US. What other countries do you see? Well, I'll just bring up some context to that. There's many people that tend to travel to Europe, and they here in Australia when they have a croissant, they bloat. There's inflammation, but when they travel to say Italy or France and have a croissant there, they don't have the same. They don't suffer from the same side effects. And I've always wondered what relationship that has to obviously how that flour was grown, but what's gone into the food production of that flour as far as a chemical sweet. Are they GMO crops? Like it's something that I'd love for you to maybe bring that topic home a little bit for our audience to see how that affects us, our food choices every day, and also how our governments and regulatory bodies behave shape what we have available to eat.
Right. So there's a number of things that contribute to that in Australia and the United States versus the Italian piece of bread. In the US, they bred the wheat for more gluten. So there's more gluten here. The way that they do the rising in Europe traditionally versus here they'll do a quick rise and it doesn't eat up some of the toxins that would normally be gone. 3 to 5 days before harvest, especially in colder climates when you want to cause a ripening, like in Canada, they may spray it with glyphosate. Now, glyphosate, and Zach Bush showed me the pictures. He put glyphosate in a petri dish and the cells separated. Now that's leaky gut. He took epithelial cells, the same cells that are lining the intestines. They're one cell thick. Now, leaky gut is a pretty dangerous situation. Alessio Fasano from Harvard wrote an article saying all disease starts with leaky gut. So when you separate those cells, then you allow undigested proteins, as well as glyphosate and other things, to go into the food supply. Now, what happens is that creates an immune response, which can be inflammatory. Now, I like to say that the little the immune system that attacks it, they all get out their iPhones and take pictures of the intruder and post it on their Facebook and say attack anything like this. But they have old iPhones, it's pixelated, and so they attack anything that looks like that, which could be the pancreas or the thyroid. And now you have autoimmune disease because of leaky gut, big proteins coming in, and a immune system that'll attack things that look like it, which turns out to be our own bodies. This leaky gut is linked to all these different diseases. Now, if I've done this, I've been on a call with Zach Bush and John Gilday and me and someone else going into I think I was the first person to propose that glyphosate was causing gluten sensitivity. And because I know what it did, and I talked to a gluten expert and they fit hand in glove. Then Stephanie Seneff did this amazing article about, anyway, we're now all saying it, but there's a lot more details than I knew. There's zonulin and PPP and all these different things biochemically that cause this gluten reaction. It also suppresses digestive enzymes. We talk about bigger proteins causing allergic reactions. Well, in carnivorous fish, glyphosate blocked all three categories of the of the enzymes, the protein, the starch, etc., so that now you're not digesting fast enough. You have open gut, and you also can turn into putrefied gas and all that stuff as it starts to break down. There's all sorts of biochemical reasons why glyphosate with wheat together can be dangerous. And the correlation of glyphosate sprayed on wheat is linked to celiac disease. And Stephanie Seneff did that one.
Wow. Um, as far as awareness around these realities, the work that you've been doing and many others, where do you see where we're at? Like if we zoom out and go and look at our public awareness, our consumer movements, starting to shift our food system, starting to acknowledge where we're at, what we've done, the mistakes we've made, the lies we've been told. Where do you see, because you're deeply entrenched in this, this is your life work, where are we at now when it comes to GMOs in our food supply, agrochemical use? Are we still status quo, or what can you see rising? Is there a phoenix rising is what I'm hoping you're going to say.
Right. There's different phases of this. The biotech industry, Monsanto literally told its consultant it wanted to genetically engineer 100% of all commercial seeds within 15 to 20 years back in the 90s or 80s. And that whole schedule got derailed by consumer concern about health, particularly in Europe. We then multiplied that around the world. And by creating such consumer concern, by educating consumers, it protected the food supply and kept the number of GMOs to about a dozen. And then the Roundup started to become known for its dangers, particularly in the health food sector. And then others, like those of us who you're interviewing, started getting the word out to millions of people. And then there became a pushback against glyphosate. There's enough information out there for any reasonable member of the government to ban it. But members of the government and reasonable are not usually in the same sentence. And like the United States, USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, it's basically an enforcement wing of big ag. And Kennedy knows all about glyphosate. He was one of Brent Wisner's co-attorneys in the first. He interviewed me extensively in the podcast. He knows about it, but his hands may be tied because of the USDA and the EPA, and he's in charge of the FDA. So I was hoping for a death knell to glyphosate for a long time, and it's been piecemeal. Because of the lawsuits, they've committed to take it out of the household Roundup, and they put in other chemicals which may be more acutely toxic. And now they're trying to prevent liability so that no one can sue Bayer that bought Monsanto. And if that goes through, it gives them a free pass. So we don't know where glyphosate's going to go, and we really need to educate people. And then we have the organic oasis that doesn't allow it. We have the glyphosate residue free certification. We have other groups that are trying to give consumers choices that don't have glyphosate in them. Now then, the biotech industry introduced gene editing. And one of the first, countries that they always get things approved in is Australia, New Zealand. And I mean, I remember talking to the regulators. I met the gene regulator. I met a bunch of people in the main government and also by Zoom. And I find their logic to be ridiculous. I'll give you an example. I said, why don't you require animal feeding studies? Because you can't get all of the negative reactions to a GMO simply by compositional studies. And the person said, because sometimes animal feeding studies won't catch a problem. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. But that's not a reason why not to use them, because they do catch some problems. I mean, there was no logic there. Oh, because they may miss some problems, we don't want to do them at all. But we know from animal feeding studies, they'll show up problems that were not available in the compositionals. Anyway, they're ridiculous. They're completely not scientific. They're really bad at their jobs. Really bad at their jobs if their job is to protect consumers and agriculture, consumers and environment. If their job is to protect big ag, they're really good at it. So they're the ones that the companies go to first to get things approved. Just as another example, Monsanto decided to get a high lysine corn approved by the regulators in Australia and New Zealand. And Monsanto said, oh, this protein that's in the pig corn, the corn that's, so we don't have to add lysine as a separate thing. It's all built into the corn for the pigs. Oh, that's in soil. It's in soil. So it's already in the human food supply. So we have no need to test it because we have history of humans eating this lysine protein in soil. So Jack Heinemann from New Zealand called their bluff and calculated how much corn an average American male would eat and how much of that lysine he would be eating if 100% of his corn were this Monsanto variety, how much of that lysine protein was in soil, and how much soil they'd have to be eating per day. It was 22,000 pounds of soil per second. Per second. This is the logic that Monsanto gave to the Australian New Zealand regulators. I sat with Judy Carman, a brilliant analyst. She just pointed out hole after hole after hole of the way things were approved. So now the law is that the gene edited stuff doesn't have to be looked at. The gene edited stuff must be safe because the biotech industry says it's safe, reliable, predictable, and even natural. So you could introduce gene-edited food into the food supply, gene-edited animals, gene-edited microbes, release them into the environment. And we're talking a technology that is so cheap and easy, it's used in high school classes. For less than $2,000 US, you can buy a lab and do CRISPR in your basement. And people are doing it. And the first microorganisms that were approved from gene editing, Australia, or one of the first. So anyway, so now we're in a situation where, because it's so cheap and easy, and there's this belief that it's safe, no one's doing the research that's necessary. You can create all sorts of new foods and release them in the environment, and now you're replacing nature and replacing the food supply. So we're in a situation where, even though a few years ago it was all high fives, it was like we've succeeded in containing it, and maybe it'll go away. And now with the new technology, they've convinced the authorities in various countries that to look the other way for gene editing. Now, these days, consciousness moves, awareness moves. Social media and other things can get information out there. I do believe that consciousness evolves and that there's ways to stimulate greater awareness and appreciation through information, through technologies, etc. So I am of the hope that we're going to have one of those awakenings where people realize that, of course it's not a good idea to kill microbiomes, to release genetically engineered microbes that might stop the carbon cycle in soil, that may prevent algae from producing most of the Earth's oxygen, that can change the microbiome inside us, to change the food supply that we've had for billions of years, to change the nature of animals. I mean, they wanted to genetically engineer out the mothering instinct of livestock so that they wouldn't feel bad when you take away the kids. This is the mindset. Rather than build agriculture around nature, change nature so that it fits into agricultural models. I think I think it's coming soon where there's going to be this obvious, well, of course it's not a good idea. that now in this generation, now that we have a technology that can influence all living beings and all future generations, and that we're handing the keys to the kingdoms to high school students to release whatever they want, of course it's not a good idea to give a detonating button to an atomic bomb to a teenager and say, don't push the red button. We don't want to give the technology to everyone and say, oh, don't release something that might self-replicate and cause harm to all future generations. But how do they know? They don't. So we keep plugging away in the information. As you know, I'm involved also in consciousness raising, which we can talk about at another time. And I am an optimist. I did see the tipping point come against GMOs in part from our work through education. We had enough resistance in the supermarket to stop it from expanding. We had enough resistance so that people are holding on to organic now to prevent eating GMOs or glyphosate. I have a film I did with Amy Hart called Secret Ingredients at secretingredientsfilm.com, and it convinces virtually everyone to switch to organic in order to avoid GMOs and Roundup. So we do need you to get this information out. We do need this and other interviews and films and books and articles and social media posts to get out. At the same time, in terms of consciousness raising, I've taught 1,500 people to speak on GMOs. And I said, look, I'm an optimist. I do believe that we are going to win this. And the information itself is so devastating, so melodramatic when a mother realizes her son's problems may be because of what she fed him. I don't need to make it more dramatic. Give them an opportunity to get better, to heal, to have, the system will heal itself. In the film, Secret Ingredients, a family of 5 had 21 chronic conditions. The oldest son had autism. They took organic, they took the food out that was giving the problems, switched to organic. The 21 conditions went away. The son is no longer autistic. Another family, same thing, switched to organic. Son is no longer diagnosed on the spectrum. There is a self-healing mechanism available that gets suppressed in the presence of these toxins. I'm not saying it's going to work that way with every autistic person. Another film of mine, Genetically, had 3 families where they got better, but they weren't off the spectrum. But it showed the healing takes place when you give it a chance. So I'm ultimately very excited when I talk to people who hear the knowledge, change their diet, overcome a chronic illness that they've been struggling with for decades, and then they start telling others. So I think we are ultimately going to get the word out, and thank you for your work on that.
Thank you, mate, for your work in this space. And I think that potential of conscious development will be a byproduct of people meeting their health needs, because when you're stressed and inflamed, it's a really hard ask.
No, it's an interesting thing. It's like if you're all inflamed and stressed, you don't have the clarity to do what's needed to evolve individually. But when you evolve individually, then you get the clarity and you stop doing the things that were causing the problem.
Yeah.
So they push each other up.
Yeah, we got a bit of a chicken and egg story. But I wholly agree with that. We have that potential, and I'm always filled with hope because of the healing capacity of not only us as humans, but of the mother of Gaia herself. She knows what she's there's my potty mouth coming out. She knows what she's doing, right?
Hey, it's your audience. You can do whatever you want.
I'm wondering, as we speak to this, is there a case study for us is there a country that's gone, no, enough? Like, is there something we can look toward, or people can look toward, as a blueprint of what's possible in this space, of the eradication of the toxins and the flourishing of our human potential? I don't know if there is.
No, there's no beautiful control where you can compare the epidemiological changes, because in Europe, city dwellers have glyphosate in their urine. So it's there, it's being used, it's being absorbed. There's differences that you can check out in terms of Europe, but it's being pummeled now by the biotech industry because it's a holdout on gene editing regulation. And the other side has won certain stages of the battle, convincing commissioners and whatnot that gene editing is safe and should be deregulated and not labeled. So that's the biggest arena right now where what happens there is going to affect the rest of the world because they are an export destination. As long as Europe is holding out against gene edited products that need to be labeled and tested, you won't see them grown and sold in the United States in a big way and put into the grain elevators and shipped off because it can stop ships if they find unapproved varieties. I used to work at a GMO detection laboratory as the VP of marketing, and we found Starlink corn for one of our clients, and it was $1 billion problem where all U.S. export markets stopped importing U.S. corn because it might have been producing this genetically engineered allergen. So if Europe continues to hold out, it affects the entire trade of the world. If Europe capitulates, then Africa can ship stuff north, US can shift stuff east. All of a sudden, it's gene rush on the food supply, like a gold rush.
Mm-hmm. I want to
I'll tell you
reimagine.
one thing, Blair, is that I went to Africa, I think 2007 or something, and I went to Zambia. Now, Zambia had a famine and they had a law, no GMOs allowed in the country. So the US sent ships of GMO food, seed, corn, whole corn and soy, to Southern Africa, to these famine areas, because it was going to feed the world. And so a group of investigators went around the world from Zambia and came back with a recommendation we shouldn't allow it for environment and for health. So they said no. And other countries said, can you at least mill it? Can you at least mill it to meal so that it can't be planted? And the USDA said, no, take it or starve, because they wanted people to plant it to infiltrate African agriculture. So Zambia was blowing the storyline that GMO is going to feed the world by saying no. They found an alternative. They fed their people. No one died, but they were being pummeled. There was visitors of senators and congressmen. I was talking to some religious people and their cardinal or their head of their religious group got lied to about the U.S. government. I was talking to their former Minister of Agriculture. He said he was introduced to the U.S. Minister of Agriculture, Secretary of Agriculture, as from being from Zambia, and the person said, backward country, and walked away. They were being pummeled for their decision. So when I wrote this very long article for Noseweek magazine in South Africa, not Newsweek, Noseweek, I got a message from the government newspaper in Zambia. Can we reprint it? And they reprinted the entire spread inside the newspaper as an article from me with a picture of their president in the middle, because I was redeeming their position. Everyone in the country knew what a GMO was. You go somewhere and says, oh, what are you talking about on the radio? I'm talking about that thing, where you take a gene. Oh, you mean GMOs? Everyone knew. Everyone knew that the U.S. had targeted Zambia. I ended up speaking to the House of Chiefs, apologizing on behalf of the United States. I spoke on the government TV, the government radio, and I gave them the real reasons why their decision was so important for the health of the nation. Now, in South Africa, for example, they eat corn 3 times a day. It's a staple, right? I learned that in one farm, they were growing GM corn and feeding it to the cows and pigs who were getting sick. But the workers were also eating that corn 3 times a day and getting sick. And 1 or 2 would die in a month. And they had to use 20% more workers than they needed because so many were sick. When they switched to non-GMO corn at the recommendation of a veterinarian who knew it would help the cows and pigs, the workers got better. So they were the canaries in the coal mine, having more GMOs than anyone in the world, because it was 100% GM corn and then it was 100% non-GM corn. So you could see the difference. So thank goodness they didn't feed genetically engineered corn to people suffering from a famine, or it would be 90% of their caloric intake. I talked to people who got these supplementation powders from the US that would cause diarrhea and get them sick. They would feed them to the pigs because it was too dangerous for humans to eat, and that wasn't circulating widely. So yeah, we did have a holdout in Zambia. I haven't been there in a while, so I don't know if it's still a non-GMO country, but I was proud to support their position.
I'm sure there'd be red carpet for you if you go back next time and they've still held out.
Yeah, I've had that experience in certain places, and the Agriculture Committee in Vermont was a red carpet experience. They read my book and then passed the first state regulation on GMOs in America.
I'd love to take a moment together to reimagine, because I think that's a big part of what we need to do in this movement, is to put it out there of what we desire in our food systems for our health, for our families, for ourselves, for our landscapes. What would, if we get to phase out these harm-causing chemicals and practices and procedures and can realize the beauty of a post-agrochemical GMO future, what does that look like to you from a personal perspective, but also from your community and beyond that, like for your nation? I'd love to hear that.
I've traveled to 43 countries and speaking on GMOs. And one thing that local groups love to do is to bring me to healthy farms. I'm not a farmer, but I've learned, going over and over again. It happened in Australia, happened in New Zealand, happened all over the world. And I remember in Brazil, there was this one farm system where they created healthy farms and also on-farm processing for value added. And one of the main benefits that the farmers reported was happier and better home life. And it was wonderful. I've been to food cultures where people really honor and love food. And, one species of tomato is honored, amazing. One species of whatever they have their own flavor, their own speciality. They have their own healthy impact. The thousands and thousands of types of rice in India were characterized, this rice is for the pregnant person, or this dal is for the there's very specific medicine cabinet in the food. And when they replace that all with the ones that work better for harvesting equipment for big ag, they destroy the diversity. There is a relationship between the health of species that we eat and our health that we're only beginning to understand. There's RNA in plants that regulate our genes. We talk about vitamins and minerals, then we learned about phytonutrients. We learned more about, metabolic byproducts. Even the RNA can regulate our gene expression. Ancient Ayurveda talks about the laws of nature that govern the production of that particular herb are the laws of nature that govern our hearing. And if you take that, it resets the hearing to the proper sequence, and that's why herbs work. Right? Now, that translates into RNA and a proper sequence. It actually has a scientific counterpart today. I talked to Dietrich Klinghardt, who's a functional medicine advanced doctor here. He said, sometimes herbs work possibly because of the microbes that they attract. There were hundreds of studies on St. John's wort. Half of them said it didn't work, half of them said it did. The ones that didn't work, they were processed in such a way that any of the microbes would be gone or die. He said, salad, we only absorb 5%, but why is it so healthy? Maybe it's the microbes on there. The microbes are part of the micro Jedi army that work on our behalf. For a woman who has a breast tumor, bacteria come and encapsulate it, protect it. The microbiome determines whether we're healthy or not through our lives. It can determine that we can be more social because it wants to pick up the microbes from other people. When in the second trimester, milk digesting microbes come into the birth canal, inoculate the baby. Microbes come from the first milk, getting rid of the oxygen so the bifidobacteria can survive. More come from the skin of the nipple. Then, if the child is sick, it changes the bacteria and microbes in their saliva, which feed back through the breast, which change the breast milk until the kid is healthy, and then it changes back. A lot of the breast milk is not designed for the kid. It's indigestible. It's designed to feed the microbes. There is a give and take between the microbiome level, the plant level, the animal level, and the human level that we don't fully understand. And we have destroyed many of those connections and destroyed many of those kingdoms, in fact, reducing the biodiversity, reducing the microbial richness, etc. So in a future where we are honoring and creating an ecosystem that is nature first and life first, we may be developing side effects of higher consciousness, side effects of greater compassion, side effects of greater, less violence, more peacefulness. We may have side effects of much better health than we're having now. That, I think, is, of course, it's like a duh. You can look at the charts to see the reduction in health in all these different areas since GMOs and Roundup and agriculture took its turn. And not just agriculture, but the way foods are created, from ultra-processed foods to more natural, which also means cooking, which also means sitting down and eating. 20% of meals in the United States are eaten in cars, right? There's a whole difference in culture. Like I am told in France, or in parts of France, kids come home and eat with their parents during school day. It's like, it's unheard of here. So there's a whole way of holding life at the center of our life. And that includes agriculture, and includes honoring farmers, and includes honoring the food. So it's a lot bigger than I can respond to now. If we had a few days, we could workshop it.
I hear that. What I'm hearing actually is bringing back the sacred into our food, the reverence it deserves, the respect that the people that produce it, but also that invitation has beautiful byproducts of reconnection to ourselves, to our food system, to our communities, to our families, and to Mother Gaia as well. So I think if we change our food system, we have a great opportunity to realize that potential of realize the human potential in essence, and how we exist and act on Earth in harmony with nature and each other. As a closing reflection, Jeffrey, that we could leave our listeners with one truth about GMOs and glyphosate, something you won't hear from the mainstream media or our wonderful regulators, what would it be?
I want to make sure I leave with a positive note. I mean, I could say that GMOs and glyphosate are probably the major driver of most of the major diseases on the planet right now. So there's a high correlation between GMOs and glyphosate and inflammatory bowel disease, death from obesity, anxiety, diabetes, deaths from Alzheimer's, deaths from Parkinson's, deaths from hypertension, autism, insomnia, celiac, acute kidney injury, death from kidneys, all sorts of cancers, all sorts of birth defects, deaths from lipoprotein metabolism, peritonitis, hepatitis C, dementia, deaths from senile dementia, ADHD, schizophrenia, suicide by overdose, etc. All of those rise in parallel with the increased use of GMOs and Roundup. And I have interviewed scientists and doctors who can explain in each case a plausible causative pathway between GMOs and glyphosate and that particular disease. And I have surveyed 3,256 people who claim to get better from 28 different diseases when they switch to non-GMO and largely organic food, sometimes completely eliminating many of the things you just heard. And I have talked to many farmers. Farmers who say when they put their animals from GMOs onto non-GMOs, they immediately get better. You can see them change in 2 days. I've convinced thousands of health practitioners to put their patients and clients on organic and non-GMO, and they see revolutionary changes. Same with veterinarians for livestock and for pets. And when we look at the animal feeding studies where you force feed the animals GMOs or glyphosate, they end up with the same diseases that I just mentioned or their precursors. So the thing that is revealing that I want to share is it is driving a vast number of diseases. And the way to switch out of it that gives you self-awareness is to create a spreadsheet of all your symptoms and your energy level and how much you're sleeping and your mood. And that's the left side. Then every day is a different column. Top is percentage of organic that day. And then 1 to 10 on every single symptom or disorder. Switch to organic and watch the change. It's holistic. You may be doing it for your skin condition and end up healing your brain fog or being able to sleep or having who knows what. And so that is the way out of it personally with intention. And then the one thing that I've noticed that is propagating GMOs and glyphosate is the thought virus that it's not my job, it's someone else's job, and I'm sure they're doing a fine job. The US law is the FDA doesn't have to show safety. Monsanto decides, I'm sure they're doing a good job. I go to other countries and I talk to their regulators. They say, we don't have to evaluate it because the FDA evaluated it, and I'm sure they're doing a good job. Everyone pushes it somewhere else. And so the invitation is to not push it away, but to realize that there's an individual responsibility here to know things and to make choices and not to assume that it's handled. Because when we stop giving our power away and giving our authority away, the side effects of that are amazing.
So beautiful, mate. And they bring the power back, people. Take radical responsibility for self and see what happens. Jeffrey, thank you so much for sharing time with us today. It's such an incredible body of work you've brought together. You're such a vibrant, beautiful human who has expanded your own consciousness, and I look forward to having that conversation sometime in the future. Again, it's a pleasure to sit next to you, stand next to you in this movement, and I look forward to so much more as we unravel this awareness campaign that we hope will shift minds and hearts and realize the beauty we can create together. Cheers, mate.
Thank you so much, Blair. Cheers.
Jeffrey, thank you for shining the light on this hidden story around this invisible ingredient. How GMOs and glyphosate were woven into our food system and how we can begin to unravel that story for the sake of farmers, families, and future generations. And to our listeners, if you found this conversation eye-opening, please share it. This is information people deserve to know. Look forward to seeing you. Thanks for listening and keep tuned in.